From Boca Raton, Florida, Rabbis Efrem Goldberg, Philip Moskowitz, and Josh Broide are taking you behind the Bima. The BRS rabbis schmooze about contemporary issues and talk to special guests who give a behind-the-scenes look at how they got to where they are and what keeps them going. Welcome to Behind the Bima.
It's Wednesday evening, 9 p.m. I'm Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, joined by my dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Joshua Broide, and we are here to take you
behind the Bima.
Behind the Bima is back.
Finally.
After a Yontif break, the way the Yontif schedule fell out Wednesday nights, we just took a break. We weren't taking a break. We were forced to break, but we are back. First opportunity. We are back, and I hope that we're better than ever. I want to thank incredible sponsor tonight, AlephBeta.org. The truth is not the sponsor, it's our guest. Rabbi Fohrman is AlephBeta.org. This is the biggest favor we're going to do for you. Go on AlephBeta.org, sign up, subscribe. It will change your life. Rabbi Fohrman is unbelievable. The Torah learning, he will expand. He will blow your mind. You will be grateful. It's worth every penny. Buy it as a gift for somebody. Take advantage of the free learning opportunities on Aleph Beta or their podcast, Into the Verse. We'll talk more about that with Rabbi Fohrman, but he's amazing. We'll talk more about in a moment with Rabbi Broide, how Rabbi Fohrman changed your life. But first, Rabbi Broide, how are your holidays? Where are you now? What's going on?
We are traveling the world right now. We are in the Motor City, Detroit Rock City, Pistons. In fact, I saw a billboard. I was coming from downtown back to wherever we are right now, the Jewish community, and there was a former guest Behind the Bima on a billboard.
Really?
A former guest, current judge who's running for re-election.
Nice.
Right? So
amazing.
Big billboard for Richard Bernstein.
Amazing. What brings you to the Motor City?
We are spreading Torah far and wide. That is
Torah far and wide.
And Torah.
You continue to do great things, Rabbi Broide. You're making us proud. My beloved Yankees were eliminated from the playoffs, which just means that Hashem listens to my wife's prayers over mine. She davens they get eliminated, so that time is not wasted. That's a waste of time. But I'll tell you something interesting. I want to tell you this observation I had about sports. New York City. I'm from New York originally. You are. It's close enough. We're close enough. Considered New Yorkers. And New Yorkers have a very short leash when it comes to sports, right? We root and we cheer like nobody else. But if someone's unsuccessful, we can turn on somebody quicker than anybody else. And I was just thinking while they're booing some record-holding players that, like, what do you think? He's not trying to hit the ball? The pitcher's not trying to strike somebody out? Like, sports is a funny and a fickle thing. Almost every sport that they're trying hard. It's just you either got it, you don't have it. It can disappear on you as quickly as you had it. So, like, what are you getting emotionally invested in it? What are you cheering or booing? Yeah, there are mistakes. A coach or manager makes a bad decision. There are mistakes that could have been avoided, so the person should be accountable. But on the whole, the basketball players trying to make the shot. Baseball players trying to hit the ball. Well, they don't. It's not because they don't care. They care as much as you. It's because whatever reason they can't. Anyway, that was my major breakthrough. Big observation. Big CM coming up, Rabbi Broide. You're still doing the daf.
I apologize. First of all, I might need some sunglasses here. I don't know. I mean, this is the high tech we have here, and like on the back of your phone, you got
the flashlight going as your
I literally have it. It's in my face right now, so we get some good lighting here. But yeah, the daf is about to complete another Masechta. We got Ksubas on, almost in the books, and but I'm really giving another shot this year. I did not make it through. I picked it up towards the end. I guess it was in Bamidbar, was the Shnai Mikra, but we're going to give it another shot this year. We're going to try and get through the entire 5 books. It hasn't been easy.
Unbelievable. Mazel tov on the sim of Ksubas. For those who want to start, great time to start Nedarim.
It's today.
On board on Thursday. Thursday's Nedarim.
Start the last page of Ksubas.
That's right. That's right.
Why wait for the
former Behind the Bima guest. That's what your boy Stefanski says, is why would you wait till Thursday for Nedarim? Pick up the last couple dapam of Ksubas.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I'll just tell you something else. On the Shnai Mikra, there's a little group apparently that started in your shul now. There's a little support group for guys that want to do it. There's about 10 guys growing. And there's even a test you can take. Some guy offers $100, I think, if you average an 80% the entire
Wow.
safe there, so you can get $100. It's not about the money. I think it's just more that people want to
Beautiful thing.
accountable. So I took the test right after Shabbos. I didn't want anyone to think I was cheating because it's all on the honor system. So I had Jake, my son-in-law, sitting in the same room. And it was actually funny because right before that, I went through the last Rashis right until end of Shabbos, and there was the one about how the wife is like the bias, right? I told that to my wife and daughters, and they didn't appreciate it. But that was actually one of the questions, so I got that one. But I scored a 76%. So I feel like I'm
Better than high school. Better than high school for you. That's
better
good.
than high school. It's actually pretty much where I was, but it's
I'm proud of you. Anybody could do it. It's really amazing. Kol hakavod. Your growth and commitment this past year, Rabbi Broide, has been inspiring to so many listeners who write into us and tell us. So
you can join us. Join the group.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable. Yom Tovim season over. People ask me how it is. I always say Motzei Simchas Torah. And I want to not only make Havdalah, I like to bench Gomel because it's a really big deal. Not just Simchas Torah, which is so many, a million moving parts, have no voice. If you have a voice at the end of Simchas Torah, you didn't have a good Simchas Torah.
Right.
It's not just the end of Sukkot. You're going really from Elul, almost before Elul, when the planning starts. Because if you wait till the first of Elul to start, whether it's renewing membership, whether it's Yom Noraim forms, whether it's the seating, whether lining up the Chazan and the Bali Tekiya, Bali Kriya, Minyanim, it's unbelievable the amount of moving parts that have to go on. So it really begins before the first of Elul. Then you got Elul and the themes and the teaching and the classes. You got Slichos. Then you got Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Tshuva, Yom Kippur, so many moving parts. Right. Then you can't, there's no letdown. Between Yom Kippur, you had a Shabbos. Between Yom Kippur and Sukkot this year, you had Sukkot, you had a Shabbos Chol HaMoed Sukkot. By the time you hit Simchas Torah, we sat at Boca Raton Synagogue. We sat at BRS and BRS West, our satellite, and Boca Point, our newest satellite, on those three campuses.
And BRS
we sat
Outreach.
And BRS Outreach. How many people do you think we sat? We sat over 2,500 people. Wow, 2,500 people. Thank God. We're so grateful to be back full force, to be a community, to feel a sense of unity, for people to be connected. So many different minyanim, each one with its own personality, its own character. There are people who are really bemoaning that. I'd say we celebrate that. I say that if we can be united under one banner, one community, one group of Rabbanim, and we cannot make people conform or squeeze them or fit into a box and not have different breakaway competing shuls and duplicating resources, then we should celebrate that. That's amazing. It's amazing. So, that was incredible. So when you get to that Motzei Simchas Torah, I get emotional. During that Marav on Motzei Simchas Torah, I actually get emotional. It's like, I don't know, it's crossing that finish line of the marathon you spoke about recently. It's emotional. You cross the finish line, which is grateful to all the people who worked so hard and all the people responsible for so many moving parts. So much could go wrong. We had a powerful Ne'ilah moment this year. In the middle of Ne'ilah, we're down in the Silent Shemona Esrei. We started Ne'ilah, and all of a sudden a woman screams out, Hatzalah, Hatzalah. Right. Somebody passed out in Ne'ilah. And Hatzalah then screams for doctors. Got a lot of doctors in our shul. They all go into the women's section. I and everyone else panicked, like, keep davening? Run over there? What can I do if I go over there? Best thing I could do is keep davening. Thank God she was fine. Everything was okay. But I don't know, there's nothing that can inspire your Ne'ilah, like someone screaming Hatzalah, Hatzalah at the beginning of Ne'ilah. Anyway, super grateful to have reached this point and excited about heading into the winter. A gesunter winter. It's a great expression.
That's like the daf last week, or for you last week. For me, it was actually just yesterday. But the Rebbe was dying, and the maid, whatever, throws down something. So the second that he's not learning or davening.
An interruption, right.
That could end it. So keep davening, keep learning.
Yeah, I was super grateful, and now it's time. Now it's time to put all that davening into action. People say, "How was your Rosh Hashanah? How was your Yom Kippur?" The answer is, I have no idea until next Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I don't know. I don't know if I got what I asked for. I don't know if I'm living up to the promises and pledges. I don't know. I can tell you how the chazan was, how the rabbi was, how my seat was, how the air conditioning was, but how was Rosh Hashanah? How was Yom Kippur? I don't know. You don't know.
But it's amazing to think about how much effort, right? It really shows you. Like you said, just being honest, I think, for someone that puts in more effort and now you're ready to really start, it's a very exciting proposition. And that's like, let's rock and roll. Let's do this.
That's it. Let's rock and roll. We got a lot more to talk about. We have a lot of behind the beamers coming up. We got great guests. I really want to talk about, I'm not going to take the time now because I want to bring on our great guests, but I want to talk about the notion of conversations. I'm more and more trying to pull back from social media, the internet. I think the conversations online with an audience where people are performing and they're righteous signaling and they're doubling down and digging in their heels, they're so counterproductive, they're unhelpful. And I think that, a lot of ideas can be shared online. You can write articles. I write articles. You could share ideas. You could challenge and provoke thinking. But real conversations and relationship building, I think it's offline. It's with cameras off. It's without an audience. It's without likes. It's without. So, and there's a reason I'm saying all that, which I'll come back to another time. We got a beautiful email, Rabbi Broide, from a Reform Jew who left her Reform temple, and she wrote you an email after your words Kol Nidre came to your explanatory service. She wrote you a beautiful, beautiful email. I know it was to you. She CC'd me, and I had such pride in you and pride in us because, and I think again, you talk about these conversations. She writes. I'm looking at the email for a minute. I want to let you know how much your word spoke to me on Kol Nidre. This is an email from a Reformed Jew, a woman, to Rabbi Broide, CCing me and Rabbi Moskowitz because we all have a relationship. You spoke of Jews just loving all Jews no matter the affiliation. You spoke of new beginnings, chance opportunities, even in tragedy. You even mentioned that each and every one of us going through something. We're not alone. I know you're aware I left my temple in search of more.
That part I got from you. The part that we're not aligned. That you said that the week before.
All right, whatever. In search of a more meaningful connection to my Judaism. Growing up a high holiday Jew, a large piece of me felt missing. Over the last several years, I'm proud to say not that I found all the pieces, but rather I found a trail that leads me towards my Judaism. Taking many steps, not only with Simone on my Momentum trip, but you as well, as I've been a proud guest in your home and Passover meals. Enjoy learning from you. You have engaging answers to my questions. I feel so honored. I have an albeit unusual but awesome relationship with you, Rabbi Goldberg, Rabbi Moskowitz. I'm a high holiday Jew from wherever who had no Judaism or Zionism in my home until I made a home of my own. Today, I'm a proud Jewish woman who loves learning Pirkei Avot, loves Shabbat dinners, loves bringing combat soldiers to Boca, loves listening to Jewish commentary with 3 Orthodox rabbis, loves meeting with those in the Jewish community, loves music, loves Israel. You spoke of Chabad, it welcomes all. Not only do I feel welcome, I feel acknowledged, heard, respected. My conversations are full of meaningful dialogue, mutual respect for our differences. I have a Jewish landing pad at the moment. It's just on and on. I had a difficult time not bursting into tears most of the time that you spoke. Really, what a beautiful email. I'm so proud of you. But it's not a flex because it's really to you and about you, not me. But I think it's an example of that, right? If you and she were dialoguing online and everyone had to defend, Orthodox, she's reforming, you have a real relationship.
Right.
So you could have a relationship. She feels this way. She feels validated. She feels heard. She feels respected. She feels a landing pad of Judaism. She feels traction. She feels momentum. I don't know if she's still watching or listening to this, so she'll hear it. I want her to know how much it blew me away and inspired me. It should inspire all of us. Reach out to people who are different. Connect to people who are different. Hear them, listen to them, be heard and be listened to by them. Connect without needing to listen with judgment or have an audience or score or win points. It's not a competition or a contest. Just listen, learn. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. That was it.
I like that. I feel like it's going somewhere. Like you're doing something.
It is going somewhere. I'll tell it to you in 10 seconds. And then we're introducing Rabbi Fohrman, who's amazing. I'll just tell you, somebody recently, wrote an open letter to me online, shared it many places broadly, and I read it. They wrote respectfully, by the way. I'm not even gonna say who, what, where, or about what, because it's not important. And so I had a correspondence with the person previously, so I just emailed him. I said, hey, it was shared with me. You wrote this thing. Published it everywhere. I said, I'm here. I'd love to talk. Here's my number. When do you want to talk? And I invited him to a conversation. I didn't hear back for a while. When I heard back, he said, well, you wrote something about something. And I responded because I wanted people to see my response. And basically, I'll only continue the dialogue if we can involve everybody to watch. And I said, that sounds like a debate, not a dialogue. Like, here's my contact info. You got my attention. I'd love to talk. Right. Happy to clarify my position, happy to listen and learn from your position. Right. Maybe each of us will budge, maybe neither will budge, but I'm happy to have a relationship. And the answer was no, unless there's an audience, unless it's online. So, again, it's a shame because there could be a relationship there. So it just really got me thinking about this whole, the world we're living in wants likes and follows and retweets and reposts. And like there's a whole judge and jury out there called the world, and they're going to score who won that round, who run that bout. But that's no one wins. When that's the relation, when that's what's going on, nobody wins. Right. There's no relationship. It's not healthy. I don't think that's good. And I definitely feel good that I got that off my chest.
Yeah. No, the more I think about it, I mean, again, I've been out of the game now for about 2 years on social media, but the more I think about it, I'm trying to figure out how to get back in and if to get back in. But if there's a way to promote programs to people that might not have seen them or heard about them, great. I think that's the easiest
Right.
way. But everything else, I don't know what the value is.
Yeah.
Um,
Rabbi Fohrman, I know, is one of your heroes. Before you were on
Yeah.
this major learning kick, you were already learning with him. We'll hear more about that on the other end.
Yeah.
But it's really a pleasure to bring Rabbi Fohrman, founder, CEO of Aleph Beta, which he'll speak more about, high-quality Torah videos, a unique method of studying Torah, the Torah text. He lectures internationally about Bible themes, about Torah, about Tanakh. He was a senior writer for ArtScroll Schottenstein edition of the Talmud. He taught Bible at Johns Hopkins University. Aleph Beta, you got to check it out. It's really, really amazing and super excited. Without any further ado, what an honor to bring on our friend, Rabbi David Fohrman. Super exciting to be together with a good friend and one of my heroes, Rabbi David Fohrman, who you're such a Bal Machadesh, such a novel and beautiful, new and refreshing approach to Torah. You have expanded you've blown so many people's minds, including my own, and it's really wonderful to be together. So thank you for letting us go behind the Bima with you.
Hey, thanks. I don't think I've ever been behind your Bima before, so I'm really glad to be here with you. Thank you.
It is super exciting. There's so much to talk about. You're so accomplished, the difference that you're making through Aleph Beta, the subscription service, the free podcast, the Torah that you're elevating, enriching all over the world, the books. I want to start out with the following question. You know, for example, I'm a rabbi with a fairly large shul. I write, I teach a lot. I shouldn't say I'm great. I try to take other people's beautiful insights, collect them, and communicate them in a relatable way. I don't have novel approaches. I don't have brand new opinions. I'm not having breakthrough Torah. You know, if my niche is anywhere, it's trying to communicate with a relatable vocabulary, language, examples that people can see themselves in the messages. Your Torah, it's breakthrough. It's novel. It's the approach feels at least different than anything we've had before. What's it like to live with the pressure to have creativity on demand? What's it like to know that you're only as good as your next Aleph Beta video, as your next brilliant insight into Tanakh, as your next podcast, lecture, series, or book? You're not repackaging, you're not consolidating, you're not giving some comprehensive overview of a topic, but you have to offer something new, something that people can't get elsewhere. How do you live with that pressure?
That is a great question. The honest truth is that when I first started doing what you're talking about, it was very harrowing. I remember there was a book recommended to me years ago. When near Yisrael, I was very close with all the Neubergers I could find. And, one of them was Yankee and Rachel Neuberger, who was one of Roe Naftali's children, Yankee. And Yankee's wife, Rachel, I remember I was Ben Bias at their house. I spent many Shabbos there. And one of Rachel's favorite books, I think it was a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, right? And to me, that became, I never read the book, but that kind of says it everything. That, it's fine to be afraid. And, part of courage is not denying you're afraid and kind of jumping into fear and saying, yes, I'm afraid. And I'm going to just do this anyway. I remember we had I think it was a yearly board meeting in Aleph Beta very early on. I don't even remember, when did we start? 2012, 2013. And this was very early on, 2014, something like that. And Carly Rothenberg, who was working with us for the time, a wonderful young lady, she said, looked me right in the eye and she said, you have to start doing Parshat Shavua. And I was like, I can't do Parsha. Are you kidding? Like, I can do an hour and 15 minutes on something, but like 10 minutes Parsha, like that is not for me. She said, no, that's actually what you have to do. People want that. And I said, but every week, like I can't do that every week. It's exactly what you were saying, creativity on demand. It's like, if something inspires me, but to actually literally every Parsha. And it was very scary. I remember really doing the, Bracious. I used, Kiddushin, talked about the very difficult issue of what does it mean for marriage to be conceptualized as an acquisition, kind of a hot button topic, and then Noach, some pieces. But the whole format was new. What we were like, it wasn't just the Torah that was new. It was the format, creating these kinds of little animated documentaries. It was all new. There was no there's no template for it.
You were, you were, and you are a pioneer, and there's so much to unpack with that in terms of, did you have fear of pushback, and was there pushback? But coming back to this, I think it was Adam Grant who wrote a book I first read, maybe it was someone else, about this notion of creativity on demand. I think historically, some of the greatest artists and minds, literary figures, they would seclude themselves in nature. They would disappear for long periods of time. They waited till they had some stroke of genius. They developed some thought. And we live in this instant gratification and this on-demand time where the degree of output that you have to have of material, and you're only as good as keeping up with it. And it's hard to be creative in such a context. So do you force yourself? Do you lock yourself in a room with your Tanakh until something comes together and works? Do you, wait until something just pops into your mind? You're like, I'm going to pursue that. That's a good direction to go in. Do you force it when it's not there? Give us some insight.
I'll tell you a couple things. First of all, in general, I don't really force creativity. And I don't even think of what I'm doing really as creativity. It's funny. A lot of people say, you're very creative. I don't actually think of it that way. As a matter of fact, I'll say something that sounds a little bit crazy, but if ultimately it's about my creativity, then it's almost wrong, right? Because what I'm trying to do is be a guide, a transparent guide to some fascinating possibilities within the biblical text. But the possibilities are there, they're real, right? And the minute they're not real, and it's mental gymnastics that I can come up with because I'm just a creative guy, that's already not my mission anymore. That's not what it's about. And might as well just close up the book and go home. It's about really guiding someone to see a possibility and to kind of pull on that string and see where it goes. And really, it's even more than that. It's not just see where it goes. It's one of the things I firmly believe is that in yeshiva, we talk a lot about the Torah being a profound document, having all these dimensions of meaning in it. And, what if somebody came to you and said, I don't know how that's possible. The Torah has a finite amount of words. It's a book like any other book. How does it have all those dimensions of depth into it? And Chazal say, hafochba v'afochba tekulaba, just keep on digging in it, and it'll keep on giving to you. And I'll tell you, these 10 years in Aleph Beta have shown me that that's true. And even that experiment of going into Parsha, I didn't know that thing would work. We could have closed up shop after 5 weeks, but it somehow worked. And it was awe-inspiring to me. I mean, I remember Vayakal Pekude. What are you going to say in Vayakal Pekude, right? I mean, it's how much can you do in the Mishkan? I just did Truma Tetzava, right?
Right.
And if you look at our first year's Parsha videos in Vayakal Pekude, it's a piece I'm proudest of most. I think it's a beautiful. I think it's a beautiful piece, and I remember sitting there. That was the closest I think I came to forcing creativity. It's just I remember calling up Emmanuel Shalev, and it's talking to him in the car. It's what can I possibly say in Vayakal Pekude, and then just the juxtaposition of the tzivui, the commandment to keep Shabbos and the various malachot on Shabbos, and the commands to keep the Mishkan just kind of jumped out at me, and became the basis of a what I think is a fascinating piece. So, but ultimately, it's I don't know. It's finding a bridge into some of these layers. What's fascinating about the Torah is that it's a book kind of like no other, in the sense that I think the way it gets to infinite information is through interconnectivity. At some level, what the Torah is, as crazy as it sounds, is the internet 3,300 years ago, before electricity, but a more advanced internet than we currently have. It's like if I would say to you, Rabbi Goldberg, there's a lot of money to be made in figuring out what the next great ituration of the internet is.
Right.
If you could figure out what the internet's like
I'm in
10 years, right? 10 years from now, right? That's worth, $50 billion. So, what's the next great leap forward? And everyone has a lot of skin in the game trying to figure out what that is. So what if I told you, well, what if you could imagine an internet where there were hyperlinks, but hyperlinks did more than they do now. They don't just take you from one place to another where you click on this little blue thing and it takes you from point A to point B. What if a hyperlink actually opened up a window where you could see the place that it takes you to from the perspective of the place that you are, right? That's what a hyperlink did. And you could have 15 hyperlinks from 15 different places on the internet and get this completely three-dimensional view of what you're looking at, because you get 15 different perspectives based on the 15 places you're coming from. So you'd say, I don't think that we would have the technology to do that in 10 years. Like, I don't even know how you could do such a thing. So what if I told you it's already been done 3,300 years ago without electricity, right? That's what the Torah is. It's this hyper-connected document where the Torah uses its own narratives as a way of commenting on itself.
So here's the question I always want to ask you then, right? Because the way you describe that is so beautiful, and it really captures really succinctly your approach and our experience learning and listening to your approach. Your approach doesn't just resonate, doesn't just speak to people. The ultimate compliment I can pay you, I know I'm not the only one, many have said it, is that when one listens to one of your lectures, one of your shiurim, you start out with a series of questions, you create some tension within the text, and by the time that you're done solving it and presenting these hyperlinked texts and these multiple perspectives and layers, it's so obvious that you're like, yeah, he didn't say anything. That's just obvious now. Right. It's so obvious. No one ever thought of it before. And yet, by the time you present it, make those connections, create those layers, that complex weave, you make this net, this matrix. Now it's obvious. So here's the question that always bothered me, right? So the rest of us are not wearing the pair of glasses. We just see one dimension, the text in front of us. You've got these 3D glasses on. You're seeing three-dimensionally. I don't know if it's on demand, you could put the glasses on. If you're inspired and motivated, you got to be one with nature. You're out in rustic elegance. I don't know what inspires that creativity, these glasses. But here's my question that I've always wanted to ask you. Why did nobody see it before? Why is it we open up Rashi the Ramban, the Sforno the Ibn Ezra? Why is it that we open up countless Gedolei Yisrael, Rishonim, Achronim, great scholars, men, women? And it wasn't until Rabbi David Fohrman in the 21st century that we now have a vocabulary, or we have the pair of glasses, that we can now share something that is not just brilliant, as you said, it's not forced, it's not intellectual gymnastics. By the time that you're done, your audience feels, me included, there's no other way to read this. There's no other way to understand this. This is so incredibly obvious and communicated so brilliantly. If it's so brilliant and obvious, how come nobody said it until you?
Yeah, it's a great question. But just to go back to what, and I'll answer it in one moment, but just to go back to what you said before, right? It's ultimately about you getting out, it's about me getting out of the way and trying to be a transparent guide to those layers in the text, right? The minute it's about me, right? Which is the dangerous thing, right? You can be like, if you go on a power trip and it's like, oh, I'm a charismatic speaker, I've got these great ideas, then it's about you. You know what I mean? You're just using the Torah as a platform. What it really is, and the challenge is, it's like to almost recede into the background. And it's like, let me show you what I've seen. It's almost like being a tour guide. As to your question of how come it hasn't been seen before? And, we've all these great people. What I would say is look at the people that you named, right? The Ramban, the Sforno, right? I don't even remember all of them. The Ibn Ezra, the Hamak Dover, right? You're naming Rishonim and you're naming Achronim, right? But look at who you didn't name in that list. What you didn't name is Bereshis Rabbah. What you didn't name is Yalkut Shimoni. What you didn't name is Agadata Gemaras. And we don't normally think of, it's like if I'm learning Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum, right? So I'm saying, give me a good Mefarish to learn with. So you say, I've gone through Rashi, gone through Ramban. So you'd say, did you try Ibn Ezra? Did you try the Hamak Dover? Did you try Malbim? Did you try Hirsch? Right? That's what we're conditioned. Right. No one would say, did you try Medrash yet? Like nobody really does that. Learn Shnai Mikra. We don't think it's Medrash, that I want a real Mefarish, And strangely enough, we don't take Medrash that seriously. And it's almost like this dark secret, because whenever there's this fantastical Medrash that says that Og was holding on to the side of the ark and the daughter of Paro's hand, it feels like these fantastical stories that are mythic. And And it doesn't seem to give us this great insight in the Torah. My feeling is that what I'm doing is not really new. What I'm doing is very, very old. It's the oldest kind of commentary that we have. It's actually, I believe, the methodology behind Medrash. And who knows how much Medrash we actually have. We have what survived. How much was not written down? How much was in the base Medrash and not there? But I think, the kinds of things that I'm working on and the people who are working with me are working on are the kinds of things that Medrash is working on or Medrash is saying. The difference between what I'm doing and what Medrash is doing really, is that, let me put it this way. I'm not an Amora, I'm not a Tana, right? But I think in a way I'm explicating Medrash. I had a chance to sit with Rav Moshe Shapiro a while ago. It was funny. It was a very similar kind of thing. You were asking me off camera about my stepfather, Zev Wolfson. So I'll just volunteer something about him. So my stepfather, Zev Wolfson, was a very was very close to Rav Aaron Kotler. He was really his mentor in so many ways, and they were just very, very close. And I had the privilege of learning with my stepfather, for over the phone. It was like, it was funny because I came into the family at a certain point, and he was a very no-nonsense person. He was someone who, it's hard to just have a small talk conversation with them. You call him from there, you say, hi, Dad, what's going, like, how long are you going to talk about the weather for? Or, what they served for lunch in yeshiva for? And so I was like searching for this way that I could really connect to him. And then I started learning with him, and it's amazing. Here's this guy this person who you couldn't spend more than, who didn't even say hello or goodbye at the end of conversations because that was a waste of time. But if you would learn with him, like I would learn with him, he would have all the time in the world for me. We'd spend an hour and a half on the phone, and it was like the time would fly, and he'd like, what are you hanging up on me for? Let's continue. And we did this for 15 years. We had a chavrusa, and it was like almost every single night. And when we were in Baltimore, when we were in New York, and as a Talmud of Rav Aaron, he was, the kinds of stuff I was doing obviously comes across as new and revolutionary, and he really loved it. But every once in a while, he would stop and he would be like, okay, who said that? So I would be, well, what do you mean? Like, we're saying that. We're reading the psukim, right? And but he was, no, but like, where did you see this from? I said, Dad, we're like learning, right? This is how.
Yeah, but what sefer is it printed in?
Right, you see this in, do you see these patterns in the text? Do you see this language? You tell me what it means. You see these patterns. And he would get very frustrated with me sometimes when I was doing that. And once he said, it's like, you have to go to a guddle to talk about this. And this is, I'm going to call him. And he was very close with Rav Moshe Shapiro, Zatzal. And he got on the phone and he said, okay, you got to run this stuff by Rav Moshe Shapiro and sit with him and, see what he says. So next time I was in Israel, I sat down with Rav Moshe Shapiro for 3 hours. And, I went through some of my stuff. I got like the most controversial things I could think of, and I just ran it by Rav Moshe Shapiro. And at the end, he said, that's amazing. You should go back to America and open up a school. So I said, wow, that's really something. Why? And he said, because what you're really teaching is Amunas Chachamim. You're actually teaching belief in the sages, because you're giving the backstory to these midrashim that you read, and they seem like crazy things that are coming out of nowhere, but all of a sudden you see they're not so crazy. There's this whole layers of text. The Chazal were tuning in, very, very quickly. I'll tell you one other story like that. There was a piece I did on Shir Amalas, which you can find on Aleph Beta. It's one of our Tisha B'Av videos, and it connects Shir Amalas really to the Yosef story, the dreams at the beginning of Shir Amalas, Hayinu Kacholmim, right?
It's a great piece.
Right, and the end. I may have even done it in shul in Boca Raton, I think, with you. And then the piece at the end, there's this man who's nosei alumotav. The only time you have alumos in the Torah is in Yosef's dream, and it begins with this image of a dream, Shir Amalas, and it ends with this image of these sheaves, and Yosef's dreaming about these sheaves. So there was this whole piece I did on Shir Amalis and the Yosef story. And Shir Amalis is a kind of spiritual commentary on the Yosef story. So I was doing it on Zoom, and as a public speaker, that one of the things you're never supposed to do when you're speaking to a group is not know your audience before you begin speaking to them. So I didn't know my audience. I was under the impression that I was speaking to a group of educators from a particular school, but I wasn't. They happened to be gathered at a particular school, but they were a very different stripe of educators. Mm-hmm. So they were really from a very Haredi black hat situation. I just didn't know that. I thought they were from some sort of things. So I was talking to them in kind of the wrong way a little bit, or a little bit language which we were a little bit unused to. And I was doing this Shir Amalis piece, and there was this woman in the back of the room who kind of raised her hand and said, "This is really fascinating, but tell me where this came from." And it was this, this very same question. And I, my answer was like, well, we're learning this together, right? And we're, and this is kind of what we're coming up with. And her face fell, and it was like from then on, there was nothing I could do to get her back. It was like everything else fell flat, because where was my source? Where was my source? Where was my source? And then, interestingly enough, like 7 days later, I stumbled on a medrash that literally said my entire shir in 3 lines. Like everything I said in an hour, it said in 3 lines, right? But I hadn't seen it yet. And, and you can sometimes start with the medrash and deconstruct it by going back to the text, or you can go to the text and you can stumble on the medrash. But the medrash wasn't there to teach you methodology. The medrash was there to tell you the insights which Chazal and the sages saw. And it was like, the analogy I give sometimes is that your car's broken, you go to the shop and you ask your mechanic, and you want your mechanic to fix the car. So he fixes the car. So you ask him afterwards, so how did you know it was the tailpipe? So he said, well, I did this diagnostic, but how did you know how to read the diagnostic? At a certain point, he gets impatient with you. He's like, look, if you want to go to mechanic school, I can give you a referral. And it's the same thing. The medrash isn't there to tell you how we knew everything. It'll tell you what they saw, right? And it's up to you to, if you're interested, to begin to reverse engineer it. But I think that these kinds of close reading techniques and sensitivity to the interconnectedness of text was something that Chazal were very, very attuned to, and something which they were mining incessantly in Medrash. And then I think, different ages focus on different things. As the Rishonim came along, they just focused on different things. And there was the need to just figure out what pshat was at some level became, overridingly important in the, for the Ramban and for the Sforno and for others. And then, we're the beneficiaries of all of their work. But I think that this is, at some level, it's not really new. It's old. And, a lot of the stuff I'm doing, I think there are midrashim that is the source for it, or it's at least the kind of methodology that Medrash is working with.
Essentially, you're too intellectually honest to say state in the Medrash, but that's based, right? A lot of teachers will say state in Svarim. Someone says, where does it say it? In Svarim, the Svarim HaKadoshim, in Medrash. You're too intellectually honest to say it's in the Medrash unless you know where it is in the Medrash. But essentially, what you're saying is that it's in the Medrash. The Medrash was precursor.
But not always. In other words, my belief is that we have a fraction of the midrashim that were out there. We have a fraction of what was what I'm saying is some of the things are in the medrash. If I've seen the medrash, I'll quote the medrash, right? I'm not going to hide the source for something. If I've seen the medrash, I'll quote the medrash. Everything I have in Yud and Tamar is really just an explication of the midrashim that Rashi's quoting. Everything I have at the end of the story of Yosef and his brothers is an explication of the midrashim that Rashi are quoting. Right. And I'll mention that. If I don't mention it, I haven't seen the medrash, but I might end up seeing it 2 or 3 years later. But the video is already produced, or sometimes it's not there. Did Chazal see it? We don't know. I think it's an incomplete record. But I also think that the notion of chiddush, right, in Torah should not be something that scares us. I'll tell you another funny story, which I probably shouldn't tell you, but we
love this.
We might as well. I was speaking in a camp I'll leave it nameless just to protect the innocent. I was speaking at a camp, and I was speaking to the staff, and I was going through Pirkei Avos on a Shabbos afternoon, and just the beginning of Perek Aleph, I went through 5 Mishnayos. The guy comes over to me afterwards. He says, "That was the most amazing shir I've ever heard of. That was amazing. It just opened up these Mishnayos in ways." And it was a very simple methodology I was using. All I was doing, in Pirkei Avos, it's aphorisms, right? It's a collection of aphorisms. Every Mishnah has 3, 4, 5 aphorisms. So all I said is let's do something very simple. Let's look at the aphorisms and ask ourselves, how do they connect to one another? In every given Mishnah, how does aphorism A connect to aphorism B to C? Is it a triangle? Is it a circle? Is it a line? Right? Is there a because? Is there a therefore? Is there a but? What's the connecting pieces between these? Let's just play that game and try to figure it out as simple as we can. And once you figure that out, then ask yourself, how does this Mishnah as a whole connect to the Mishnah which precedes it? And how does that Mishnah connect to the Mishnah that comes after it? So sometimes, like in mathematics, if you have a very simple algorithm, right, do X, X plus Y, and you just repeat it over and over again, you get this incredibly beautiful fractal, the very beautiful patterns. In Pirkei Avos, it happens to be that you can do this and very beautiful things emerge from just that. So that's what I was doing this with this fellow. And I, he then said, that was amazing. But then he asked that same question, where did you get this from?
Right.
And it was well, I told you what the idea was. We're learning this medrash and we're figuring it out. And we're learning this mission and we're kind of figuring it out. We're just asking these questions. And he said, yeah, I know, but where did you see it? Right. I said, well, we're seeing it, you know what I mean? And then he said, well, I'm going to tell my daughter that she can never go to any of your shiurim. This is very dangerous. So, I tried to keep it lighthearted. We had, had a conversation with him. And then at a certain point, I said to him as gently as possible, I said to him, you call yourself an Orthodox Jew, right? He said, absolutely. I said, well, but you're not really. You're actually Reform. That's the real truth. So he says, me, I'm a Reformed Jew. I said, yeah, because let's talk about the definition of Orthodoxy and the definition of Reform. As Orthodox Jews, we consider ourselves bound by the Masorah, right? Bound by the tradition, right? He says, absolutely. So I said, okay, so let's talk about the tradition of Chumash study, how Chumash has traditionally been studied, not how Gemara has been studied. And I made the distinction. I said, in Gemara, right, you would never in your wildest dreams decide that Rashi said something and the Rishonim said something, but you're going to say something different. Or Ravina and Ravashi said something, Chazal said something, you're going to say something different. You're going to accept what previous generations said, and you're going to say your Chedushim, as it were, within your own time contemporary framework. But that's because the Gemara is essentially a legal document. And we always give weight to precedent. Every system, every legal system gives weight to precedent. Even American legal systems give weight to precedent. And our system is no different. But when it comes to learning Chumash, where it's not halacha, right, there is the first obligation that any reader has is reading comprehension. You have to actually go to the text and read it. Even before you look at any commentaries, you have to ask yourself, what do I make of this text? How do I understand this just basic reading comprehension in the text? And every single Mefarish who's ever lived has gone back to the basic text and done that. So this is what Chazal did. This is what the Ramban did. This is what the Sforno did. And the Ramban will argue with Chazal and say, here's what Chazal say, here's how I see it. And the Sforno will do that. And the Ha'amek Davar will do that. And the Malbim will do that. And all the way down. And Hirsch will have done that. And what you're coming and saying is that in the last 75 years, right, ever since ArtScroll started anthologizing things, you can't do that anymore. Now, all we can do is anthologize what people have said before us, but that wasn't the Masorah until 75 years ago. So when you say that there was an unbroken Masorah for 2,000 years, but 75 years ago it changed, that's not Orthodox Judaism anymore.
And by the way, just to interrupt you, that wasn't Rav Moshe Shapiro's Zatzal's Masorah. He didn't stop 75 years ago. He kept going.
That's right. Yeah. So I don't think we should be as intimidated of it. I think we need to, in our attitude, have a tremendous amount of of humility and an understanding of the greatness of those who are before us, and to make use of what is before us. And yet, I think the text of Chumash calls to us, and ultimately it requires of us, a full-throated engagement with the text, and to see what it means. So
I'll add this, and I can't claim to be the biggest expert of Aleph Beta, but I think something that's also very, very important to say, I can say it for you, is that your chidushim and your novel approaches, which really aren't novel, they date all the way back, but maybe the modern vocabulary or communication of those approaches, they never disparage the people and the figures of Tanakh. They're not some novel approach about why this one really was a terrible husband or wife or parent, or even though we do have a Masorah for that, even, we can all quote the people who've said those kinds of things. You're peeling back layers, you're weaving stories, you're giving insight into what really happened, but not in a way which makes us lose respect or dishonor or disregard or demean our greatest personalities, but they're elevated in our eyes. So my question to you is, which do you think is the greater, more pioneering or more revolutionary, more radical? Some of your Torah approaches, or the platform in which you share those Torah approaches? The very approach you have to Torah, or the fact that, going back, and it feels like we've had this internet forever and the ability to learn Torah in that way forever, but it's not true. It's still fairly recent. And you were an early pioneer, and you did it in a way different than many. First of all, where did the name Aleph Beta come from? And for example, you came up with a paid model where the majority is a subscription service. And in the Torah world, it's almost unheard of. And I'd like to say it stems from Mahu B'chinam Afata B'chinam, that just like God shared his Torah for free, we feel moved to share our Torah for free. But I'll be honest, myself included, it stems more from insecurity that if I charge, nobody's going to pay. I think the majority of Torah platforms, it's much more from the insecurity of people enjoy it, but do they value enough to pay for it? And you, at least publicly, didn't seem to have that hesitation. Where'd the name Aleph Beta come from? You went this paid model. You used animation to take the most profound, sophisticated ideas of Torah and do it with animation. Each of these in their own right, but in combination, these are incredibly radical. One might argue even more radical than your approach to learning, and yet you had the courage to do it. Where did that come from? What was the driver? Was it internal? Were there people around you who really pushed you? What did you learn through that process?
Gee, I wish I could say I was smart enough to figure out that this is all going to be wonderful, but I don't think I was. It was experimentation. I think I'd always been experimenting. I'd started coming up with the beginnings of this approach to learning back when I was in Ner Yisrael. I was teaching, and it's a whole story. We can talk about how I began with it. I was teaching in a secular bookstore. I was teaching in Johns Hopkins University, and but I was always looking for. I kind of felt that the methodology here deserved a larger audience. That I was speaking to 20 people in a house in Baltimore, or 25 people at Johns Hopkins University, and I could keep on doing that, but that there needed to be a way to try to project this to a larger crowd. And the internet was really in its infancy at the time. The bandwidth wasn't there really for video or for anything else. And this was in the, late 1990s, early 2000s. And I went through many failures really in trying to bring this to a larger audience. One of my failures is that I figured okay, maybe I can influence teachers by writing teacher guides. So I would try to write up my stuff as teacher guides. But the problem is that I didn't really have a distribution system for that. I'm not well known. How am I going to go and just show up to teacher in X school and say, hi, here's your guide. Why don't you try teaching this? That's not going to work. So it was futile. And I raised some money, but I couldn't sustain it. And it didn't really work that well. For a while, I tried just putting some lectures out there for free, just in audio, and putting them out on the internet. For a while, there was a RabbiFohrman.com that did that, and maybe there were people who got to it that way. But ultimately, I guess I sort of had this instinct that I mean, that, you know, if you could combine audio and visual together, it would be something. And honestly, it wasn't even an instinct. It was, I mean, I always had that sense, but it also was somewhat accidental. I'll talk to you about the combination. I think I was always a frustrated filmmaker. Back in Ner Yisrael, when I was in Ner Yisrael, I remember first year based medrash. So, you know, traditionally you put on a Purim play. And so it's a Purim play, right? So I created this was before you could really create, the tools weren't there to really create video in the 1980s, but I created a slideshow with just like audio on a cassette, but it was a multimedia presentation, Purim show. It was hilarious. It was a lot of fun. It was making fun of the high school students and the way they stampeded into the dining room for breakfast in the morning. And you know, it was a spoof of a National Geographic documentary, you know, about had these high school kids, the Homo Mechinas, you know, the Mechina man, you know, coming in. We rescued them from their, you know, swamps in Asia and brought them to here. It was very, very funny and cute. And it was the beginnings of, and I kind of felt like, boy, wouldn't it be great to be able one day to express yourself in that sort of rich documentary format. But I didn't really have the tools. The technological tools weren't there. I certainly didn't have any methodology in Torah. But over time, as I developed that methodology, I always had that itch like, gee, could you do something like that? Could you create some sort of rich docudrama, you know? And then I met Kuti Shalev, who is now the president of Aleph Beta. Kuti runs a company called CleverTech, and which is a software development company. And he listened to one of my lectures and took me out for lunch and said, like, you know, you can create a software, you know, you can create software to do what you're doing. He said, have you ever seen Salman Khan and Khan Academy? You know, he's doing something very simple, but it's taking off. And, you know, if you know what Khan Academy is doing and what he's doing. And what Kuti did is he bought me a little tablet for like $90 and said, you know, try playing around with this. This is the tablet that Khan uses. And you can write on your screen, you can do stuff, and you can screencast, and you can create a little video very simply. And Kuti is a big believer in MVP, minimum viable product. Just create something very minimalistic and see what you do with it. So I was like, yeah, Kuti, whatever. Like, I got better things to do. And I took the tablet and I just put it on the side of my desk and didn't touch it for a year and a half. And it just gathered dust until one day I happened to be watching TED, and there was a TED talk, and I happened to stumble upon Salman Khan talking about the revolution he was doing in schools, and that how, you know, and it was so commonsensical. He was saying like that there, you know, instead of trying to get hundreds of thousands of really great algebra teachers and then trying to have kids listen to lectures, and not all of them are great teachers, and then the kid doesn't really know what's going on and he's got to figure out homework but never really got it during the classroom. What if you flipped the classroom? What if you had one great teacher that was getting to everybody through the internet, and that was homework? So they got to listen to the lecture for homework, and then in class they actually did the work, and the teacher goes around, kind of walks around to chavrusas and kind of helps them. Like, wouldn't that be a great model? And they were interviewing teachers that were doing that, and he was doing that. And it was like, wow, we should be able to do that for Torah. We should be able to do something like that for Torah. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw that tablet, Khan's tablet, that Kuti bought for me. It's like, all right, fine, I'm going to try it. And, you know, I put together something pretty primitive. It's still in Aleph Beta to this day. It's a piece we did on Yavna, and then another one on the 10 Commandments. We've reanimated it 5 times now as we got much more sophisticated, but there was just the very beginning. And it was like, wow, like the technology is actually here. I've actually solved the distribution problem. This is something that people could watch, and the internet is there to get it to them. So that was really great. In terms of the subscription model, I guess I kind of felt like, look, it came from the fact that ultimately we did need a company to do it. If we were going to animate it, I couldn't do the animation for real. I tried with PowerPoints and stuff, but I couldn't get it very good. And so we started hiring some people, and Kuti was generous enough to pay from his own pocket. He basically started hiring people behind my back, and hired Shoshana Blum and began putting animators together. But ultimately, we actually needed some money to put it together. And at that point, the question is, how are we going to get the money? So one possibility is fundraising, and I hate fundraising. And so because I hate fundraising, I was like, and I remember sitting there at a board meeting, and it's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to go to people and say, I need $18,000 from you. So I said, like, why don't we, the fair thing to do is just like, let's charge $9 for, put it as a subscription model. And if people are interested, and I said, like, if we get subscribers, then that's a proof of concept. And if we don't get any subscribers, then it means that it wasn't good enough for people to pay for, so maybe we shouldn't be doing it. So it wasn't out of any great understanding that it was going to be successful. I remember Robbie Rothenberg, one of our board members, I specifically remember a car ride as we started this to them, and he was like, you're never going to make any money on this. And I said, okay, so we won't make any money on it, but we'll put it out there, and whatever it is, it is. And look, people voted, and ultimately it feels great, just because I think it feels great for us that people are willing to pay for it. It's a great vote of confidence. And it also, I think, is wonderful because, if you're ultimately beholden to to 3 or 4 philanthropists, you never really know if you're really doing anything, because the only people that you really have to please are them. And think about that. Here I am, I'm putting something out for a market of people, but I'm not actually beholden to them, and they are not any check or balance of what I'm doing. I'm beholden to these 4 people. So as long as I can make these 4 people happy, it doesn't really make a difference what I'm putting out there to the world. It's not such a healthy model. And if you can be beholden to those who are, paying a few dollars a month to have it, then if what you're doing is real. And similarly, I think for people there, it's an investment. One of the things I found is that it's easy to we all live such frenetic lives that it's easy to there's something good out there, and it's good, but I'll get to it one day. But if you're willing to subscribe and you're willing to put down a few dollars a month, nobody wants to just put down a few dollars a month and not use it. So it's like a commitment. It's a commitment to me, like, you're paying money for this, I'm going to try my best to make it as wonderful as it possibly can for you. And there's commitment on the other side of that, I'm actually going to try to get to this before Chagim or before on
it's
Shabbos.
a much more accurate, it's a truer metric or measure than the internet in general, because we know that there are people left and right manipulating algorithms and Google ads and YouTube ads and so on and so forth to get and to gain watches and listens and likes. It's happening across the Jewish world and every world. In fact, there are companies that you can pay to optimize and list and advertise, and you could take a video and you can make it viral just for the right fee, for the right amount of money, as opposed to, so someone can feel really good as if their Torah is really reaching that audience. But the truth is it didn't happen organically. And you don't know also that, you have so many views on a YouTube link. Did they go, YouTube can give the back end can give you this, but did they go on for 30 seconds? Did they go on for 30 minutes? In your case, if somebody's paying, for the most part, they're probably using it. So who's your typical consumer, your typical user? Who's a typical subscriber? Rumor has it that it's serving not only the Jewish community or the Torah community, but a lot of non-Jews as well, who gain insight to the Bible, to Torah, and they're hearing from you, or Lagayim, they're hearing an accurate approach or window into Torah. Can you share with us a little bit about the typical user of Aleph Beta?
Sure. Let me just, on the last topic though, before I get to that, I'll just say that, thank God, the subscriptions have been wonderful, and they've really helped to keep the company afloat. And, we've also reciprocated by creating a free version of Aleph Beta also, which is the podcast. We basically, our flagship product this year is really a podcast, which is called Into the Verse, and people can subscribe to it for free, and it just comes to your podcast feed and you get it. It's 20, 30 minutes, and it's a complete thing. So for those who either don't have the money or aren't hooked yet or just don't want to pay, it's there for free for you. And if you want to dive into the deep end of the pool and you're hooked and you want to see what's there, so the whole library of Aleph Beta is there, and that's a subscription. So it is, I'm really happy that we have both of those models, and it's not like there's a paywall that that keeps you from getting at this kind of Torah. The material is there in Into the Verse as well as in Aleph Beta. As far as and Into the Verse, you can get not just on our site, you can get it on any podcasting platform. It's also, by the way, the nice thing about Into the Verse, it's a little bit different than Aleph Beta in the sense that my partner is Emu Shalev, from Maccabees fame before joining Aleph Beta, but he's become a really distinguished scholar and sort of adherent and student of this methodology and producer of Torah in this methodology too. Emu is very intrigued by the spiritual implications and the sort of philosophical, spiritual, practical implications of this way of looking at the Torah and how it shapes you even beyond halacha. Like, what is it ultimately that God asks of you? And, which of course is that famous question, Ma Hashem Sha'ol Mimcha, and the answer isn't just the Dalet Amashal halacha, whether you ask that question of Moshe, or whether you ask it of Micha, it's Hasnei Alecha. There's a whole laundry list of stuff. And what you sort of find is that you begin to see these layers in the Torah, sort of the larger values and spiritual directions of the Torah start to really come into focus in fascinating ways. That's endlessly fascinating to Emu. So what he does in Into the Verse is he'll actually take conversations that I've had with him, or I've had with others, behind the scenes conversations at Aleph Beta, sometimes they're Parsha videos, and he'll kind of play an anchor with those and then come in and sort of curate those and then sort of speculate about, like, okay, so you just listen to that. So beyond that just being sort of an academic idea or a philosophical idea, what does it mean to take those ideas into your daily life and live more spiritually and live more connected to God on the basis of that? And he does a beautiful job with that. And it is, a new kind of forum. So it's a lot of fun and it's exciting.
Typical user.
Typical user. Well, there is no typical user. The funny thing about our users they're exceedingly diverse. I mean, really, really diverse. I'll give you a sense of the diversity, right? You might think, like, who's your average user? Oh, like probably a guy from TNEC, went to YU for a while, is into this. I mean, sure, there's a lot of that, right? There's a lot of folks right up the middle of the modern Orthodox plate, Young Israel of Woodmere, Young Israel. But there's a lot of folks, the head of a Hasidic seminary in Manchester, right, using this to teach her girls. A homeschooling mom in China using this to teach her girls. Hasidim in Williamsburg that I've actually gone to meet and teach in their shtibel in Williamsburg, and they're learning it and teaching it over. There's one guy in Williamsburg, I won't use his name, but he approached me and he emailed me. He says, I have to tell you, says, I love what you're doing and I feel guilty about this, but I'm using your material consistently with my guys in the Satmar world. And he's a mashpia within the Satmar world. And he says, I can't quote you because they won't, you're from a different world and it's just going to take it away. So I say it's Shtaten Svarim. I say, and it's like, is that okay? Can you give me permission to do that? I said, like, that's fine. You do what you need to do. Right. I'm very happy for Just the Torah to be out there. And he's maintained contact with me. And every 3 months or so, I get an email that, wow, that was really mind blowing. And like, look, that's what it's there for. There's no copyright on Torah. It's putting the ideas out there, and they're there for the world to take and to be touched by. And it means a lot to me to be able to reach into a community that would be hard for me to reach, in any other way. But so some of the students, in a way, are Satmar either directly on their smartphones with or indirectly through mashpiyim. And some of them, it goes all the way to, unaffiliated Jews. We see it. Look, we have a store in Aleph Beta where you can buy our books and things like that. And, if you buy a book, I see what your address is. And, I could go with you now and just look at the addresses of who bought books today, right? So a guy on the western edge of Australia right, with a very non-Jewish sounding name, right? So we're shipping a book to him. A suburb of Cincinnati, not a very Jewish suburb of Cincinnati. So I can only surmise who O'Brien is in a suburb of Cincinnati, but they aren't all Jews. And there's it's strange. When I first put out the articles that became The Beast That Crouches at the Door, my first book, I actually serialized it on the internet on a Jewish site called Jewish World Review. And the shtick they had in Jewish World Review is that, you could write a note to the author of all the articles. So you would get notes after all. So I would get this volume of email from people reading these articles. And like, I'm looking at them, and 9 out of 10 of these guys are not Jewish who are writing. And I don't know if it felt disheartening to me, but if I was completely honest, it was like the most heartfelt responses were from the non-Jewish side of it, right? And it's like the Jews were like, oh, that was a nice part.
But the Jewish email was like, why is the font so small? And the ad on the side was embarrassing. And then the non-Jews like, you're the greatest thing God sent you in my life. You're a blessing to the world.
Right, exactly. And it was really and very broad spectrum as well. Noachites, not all of them are Christians. Noah, self-identified Gerei Toshav, Noachites, Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach keepers, and the sweetest people. And I remember at the end of that, I said, like, look, I wrote these articles to appeal to Jews, but what do I do with the fact that 90% of the people that at least those articles were appealing to weren't Jewish? It was a very dark night of the soul for me. I kind of had to ask what in the world I was doing. And like, do you discount the religious, the clearly, lishma, wanting to connect to God? I mean, I remember I was teaching in Johns Hopkins, and when I was teaching at Johns Hopkins, I was, I'll tell you a funny story about that. So I was in yeshiva, and Rav Yaakov Weinberg Zatzal was the Rosh Yeshiva at the time. And I got the sense that I was going to get an invitation to give a course at Johns Hopkins on biblical things. I'd been doing stuff in the community. They'd reached out to me a little bit. And so I was very nervous because I'd never done anything like that before. And it's Torah in a completely non-Jewish environment. And so I figured I had to talk to the Rosh Yeshiva about it. So I made an appointment with Rav Yaakov Weinberg Zatzal, who I was close to, and I said to him, I said, like, look, I think I might be getting an invitation from Johns Hopkins soon to give a course there. What do you think I should do? And so he was like, what's the shaila? So I said, well, I can't control who comes to the class. It's not like I can only give this to Jews. There can be non-Jews walk in. I have to teach everybody. So he goes, yeah, so what's the question? So I said, well, traditionally, we try to keep Torah, teach Torah to Jews, issues with teaching Torah to non-Jews. He goes, what are you teaching them? So I said, well, I'm doing this course on Bereshis and on the Torah. He says, you're teaching them about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to humankind and the basic obligations that human beings have to God. You're teaching them these stories. He says, you have to teach non-Jews all the Torah that's relevant to them. This is obviously relevant to them, so of course you should be teaching it to them. What's the question? And I remember I was there at one of these classes, and there was a non-Jewish girl. She was a young black lady, and she came over after one of the classes in this very class, and she was like almost in tears. And I said, like, what's going on? And she said, like, this is a whole different way of viewing things that I had in my church. My church, the snake is the devil, and this is just this whole, and she could see, I see in the text these layers, and it's like, I had never learned the Bible this way, and I'd never learned. And she said, like, this is so compelling, and I just want the truth. Is this? And I could tell what she was really asking permission for. It was like, can I just leave my church behind and join what it is that you're doing? And I said, like, look, I know what you see here is compelling, but you probably should go back to your pastor and share with him the experience that you're having here and let him respond. And I was just thought in my own mind, like, if the tables were turned and there was a a vulnerable Jewish kid who is at some wonderful class given by some Christian person, you'd want them to give them that same opportunity to go back to their tradition. And so I think there's a lot of ethical issues of with this, of not, when your audience is not just Jews, how do you ethically deal with folks
Right.
who are coming from a different tradition?
Definitely complicated.
It's complicated, but I do think that there's work to be done there, and they are certainly responding to what it is that we're doing.
When you're writing, what do you have playing? Music, silence? You like to be in a crowded room? You like to be all alone? What do you need to have be going on while you're writing?
So there's a book, Deep Work. I forget who wrote it, but it's a very profound book on this. It's like, the book argues that, the kind of creativity, what the essential argument of the book is that the internet age has created both an opportunity and an obstacle at the same time. The opportunity is that because the world is your marketplace, right? So you can really do something very niche that would have had no chance of finding a market in your own small town. But if the world is your marketplace, you can do that. On the other hand, only the very best will really make it, because you're in competition with everybody else throughout the world, and therefore there's great opportunity. But in order to be able to develop the very best that you can possibly develop, you need deep work. You need real concentration. And the same internet that creates this opportunity is such a distractor, right? Your email, your phone.
When you were watching that TED Talk, were you procrastinating from something you were supposed
I
to be
was.
doing?
I completely admit it.
Sometimes
right?
it pays off, though. Look at that. We have Aleph Beta because you were procrastinating.
Exactly. I mean, I'm the biggest procrastinator and I'm the biggest daydreamer, and it's difficult. So sitting down to really get that quiet is very difficult for me. My staff will lock me in a room, like literally, let's just throw out the key. It's like, you are in this room, you can't come out until you have 2,500 words, and talk about forced creativity before. But for me, I kind of need really, I don't know, to be able to write, for me, is a different thing than coming up with an idea. Sometimes I can come up with an idea. I'll tell you a funny story about this. In terms of coming up with ideas, do you know what my most productive time for that is? It's absolutely crazy. It is literally walking to shul on Shabbos. It's Friday night. It's like, I think like 75% of everything in Aleph Beta was created Bein Hashmashos on Friday night, right? I mean, literally, there's something about leaving behind the week and just being able to walk without any technological distraction, without anybody there, with just enjoying. You don't have a care in the world. There's nothing that needs your attention, that can't wait until the next day. And that kind of openness, it just, for me, is incredibly fruitful. I mean, it's the gift of Shabbos. It's just an amazing, amazing thing. But that's different than writing. Writing to me is slave labor. I think I'm a pretty decent writer. You can tell me what it's like for you. I'm curious what it is like for you. Is writing? Does writing come effortlessly to you? It's tough for me. But what I need to do is I need quiet and I need white noise. So I'll put on YouTube. I've got this video of ocean waves crashing on a beach with seagulls. That's my white noise, and or coffee shop sounds. I'll just create the sounds of a coffee shop, right, or crackling fire, and that gives me just enough distraction. I need a little bit distraction, but not too much. It's just the right level of distraction to be able to write. And then
That's fascinating. For me, when I have the idea, I don't. What I write is, not nearly as sophisticated, and meaningful as what you contribute. Not in the same stratosphere. But when I have an idea, once I have the idea, I could bang out. The writing comes relatively easily. But here's the thing that's interesting. I can't write if I'm in a quiet room by myself. I can't do anything creative if I'm in a quiet room by myself. I'm going out of my mind. So sometimes I take my laptop. I go to a Starbucks for the price of the small black coffee there. All that noise and all that distraction. Now I can hone in on my laptop and I bang out an article, I bang out a shir, I organize some thoughts. It's the quiet, at least in an office. I don't know if it would be the same if I was sitting overlooking, the Swiss Alps or lake or the Golan, the Galil. But here locally, I'll go. I'm not going to disclose which, by the way. There's a lot of Starbucks. I have to go to the one that nobody knows about yet. But I have to go to the undisclosed Starbucks, and it's only in a busy room that I can actually focus and concentrate.
Right. So Starbucks is great for me. If I can get to a Starbucks, I'll do that. But I recreate the ambiance just with noise. I'll use literally coffee shop noise to try to fool myself into thinking that I'm with the crowd. Also, sometimes you need the sense. I will sometimes feel like you. I don't like being alone also. So, but I can't do this together with people. So if I'm around people, even if I'm not working with them, I don't feel as lonely, right? And that I think is the coffee shop vibe. And I can get into that. The other thing I would say is I think there's something about, to the extent that what you and I do at some level is creative work, as much as I argue that it's not essentially creativity, it's getting out of the way and letting the Torah shine. But I think there is something meditative in a way about all creativity. And I think the coffee shop helps that. You ever see the Magic Eye books? You know what I'm talking about from years ago? You should get them. Just Google them on Amazon or something. Magic Eye. It's a fascinating thing. They came up with some sort of algorithm where you can create a picture in 2 dimensions that looks like white noise. But if you look at it in just the right way, it slowly resolves into a 3-dimensional image, which is remarkable. But you have to learn how to look at it. And what's the right way to look at it? You have to relax, and you have to not be staring at the page. You actually have to relax and let your eyes look about 6 or 12 inches beyond the page. And so you're looking at the stage, but you're not focusing on it. And the minute you start focusing on it, you lose the image. But if you're not focusing on it, kind of out of the corner of your eye, the image starts to build. And you have to have the discipline that as the image builds, you let it build out of the corner of your eye. But the second you actually look at it, it evaporates, and you have to be able to perceive it out of the corner of your eye. To me, that's like my whole job. That in Torah, it's like there are layers there, and you've got to be able to perceive them, but you can't. But if you try to look at them directly, it gets back to your very first question: how do you force creativity? And the answer is, if you force it, you won't see it. If you try staring at it, you won't see it. And I think there's something about the nature of any kind of creative work to some extent that's like that. And I think that's why coffee shops help. I think what happens is if you're all alone in a room, you can't get that column out because you're forcing it. To put it in a little bit of a different terms, what I would say is this. One of the fascinating things that I've learned in Chumash is it goes back to the very first 2 chapters of Genesis. As we all know, there's 2 creation stories. So why are there 2 creation stories? So the documentary hypothesis says it's 2 authors. We say it's not 2 authors. But if it's not 2 authors, why do I need 2 creation stories? The answer is one, like as the documentary hypothesis people thought, they came up with a good question. It's just their answer was wrong. Their question was, how come the name of God is Elohim in one story, and how come the name of God is Yud Kei Vav Kei in another story? So they said there's an E and a J author. Well, we say there is no E and a J author. So how come there's an Elohim? The answer is that creation is such a mysterious thing, right, that you can't tell one story of creation. The Torah needs to tell it to you through 2 stories. There's something about this world the Kabbalists talk about as living in a fragmented world, a world of multiplicity, rather than a world of achdus, a world of oneness. Everything we have, every unity we have in this world is a function of opposing forces in tension with each other. The orbit of a planet around the sun is a function of centrifugal force on the one hand and gravity on the other hand. And the merger of those 2 forces that are in tension with each other creates this unity called an orbit. With the fact that nutrition can go up the leaves of a tree is capillary action versus gravity of these 2 forces that struggle with each other and create this thing. So too, in the Bria itself and creation itself, I think the Torah says if you want to understand creativity, you humans who aren't God, who see things as they truly are, as one, you have to see it as 2 forces in tension with each other. There's 2 kinds of creativity. One kind of creativity is Elohim style creativity, and another style of creativity is Yud Hey and Vav Hey style creativity. What is Elohim style creativity? So it is malacha, that's the word. It's building. It's literally architecture. It's God as builder, God as planner. God says, I think I'll have this. Yehi Rakia, and then he executes it, and then he evaluates it. And it's very sequential. And it starts with a plan, and then you execute it, and then you evaluate. And that's one kind of creativity, and it's great, but it's not the only kind of creativity. There's another creativity in which you don't build. You just are. It's not about doing, it's about being. Yud He and Vav He is an amalgam really of Haya, Hoveh, and Yiyah. If you take those words, the three words for existence, to exist in the past, to exist in the present, to exist in the future, you overlay Haya with Hoveh, overlay Haya, Hoveh, and Yiyah. Together, you have Yud He and Vav He, a kind of being which is past, present, and future all merged together. So instead of doing first in the future, planning, and then in the present by executing, and then evaluating in the past, there is an all-at-onceness in just being, which is a whole other kind of creativity. And the long and the short of it, without getting into too much detail, is that the Yud He and Vav He kind of creativity is organic. It's not, there's no artifice, there's no planning, there's just being with and nurturing by being with. It's like, it's the womb, it's the mother, it's the farmer with the plant. Vayita Hashem Elokim Gan Ba'eden, God as planter rather than God as builder, right? Ela told us Shemayim V'Aretz V'Yibaram, the merger of heaven and earth through rain and what they can create. That's a whole second kind of creativity. So it's these two very different kinds of creativity. And I think for us too, in the work that you do and the work that all of us do, there's two creative energies that we all have as Tselem Elokim. And one of them is this malacha kind of creativity that we're builders. And the other kind of thing, which is much more subtle and very difficult to put your hand on, is just the being kind of creativity. And what I said before about Shabbos being the time that I'm most creative, is because my kind of creativity that gives birth to what I'm doing is heavily weighted towards being and very little building. So really going back to your first question about forcing creativity, if I was building, I could force it. But if it's being, you can't force it. You've really just got to relax and be present and look beyond it and relax. And the second you focus on it and try to build it, you're imposing yourself on it, and it's all about you, and it falls apart. And to some extent, even when you're writing an article, that article it's the being part of you that just conceptualize that article in a kind of all-at-onceness without past, present, and future. It just is, and now I just got to get out of the way and let it emerge, right? What they say about sculptors and artists, right? That who was it who said the
Michelangelo?
Yeah, Michelangelo. That I just get rid of the extra plaster, right? I'm not actually creating the image is there. I think there's some of that in all of us, and I think that's why coffee shops help. They interrupt our ability to build. Right? They give us just the right distraction to interdict our ability to build and force us to relax and just let it be.
It's a perfect distinction between you and me. I'm like, I do best work in coffee shops. You're like, let me explain to you the depth and profundity of why. And that's brilliant.
That's
and
just my
unbelievable.
theory. I don't know.
No, Rabbi Fohrman, thank you. There's so much more to talk about. Please, God, we'll continue this conversation in the future. So much more to unpack and to dive into. But thank you. Thank you for the gift that is you. Thank you for the gift that is Aleph Beta. It's changing people's world. I know people who were not into Torah learning at all, and Aleph Beta, they just became addicts of consuming your Torah, because the Torah is so compelling. It's an enormous gift, alephbeta.org. Everyone should check it out, whether it's a subscription or Into the Verse, the podcast on any podcast player. But to access, after this conversation, if you're not yet somebody familiar with the Aleph Beta work, you have to go check it out because it will be life-changing. So thank you so much for giving us your time, going behind the Bima, letting us get a little insight into you and your work. And we're looking forward to continuing to learn from you.
Okay, Rabbi Goldberg, it's always great from the first time I had dinner at your house to every time I get a chance to see you. It's a real pleasure. Yasher koach to you for this wonderful podcast, and thanks for having me on. It was a real treat.
Thank you. Rabbi Fohrman is just out of this world. His view and the way he looks at things and understands things and processes things, it's just amazing. He never ceases to wow me.
He's amazing. He's. I've been watching his programs, and I've been a subscriber for years now. Actually, there's like a premium subscription that you can get as an educator. So you get the behind the scenes, and I've used his classes many times where you get the materials to hand out to people. And it blows everyone away. It's because
It does.
everything
Well,
seems it's so obvious. It's right on the page, and you just
Right.
never saw the pattern. How do you
Right.
never see this before?
Right. Only after he says it, it's obvious.
Right.
Before he says it, it's like, that's crazy. But yeah, everything, even the discussion about, only being able to concentrate when there's noise as opposed to alone, and why that is, and understanding that there's just the depth. He's also a really humble person.
Yeah.
We spent time with him offline, and that came across also in the conversation where he says it's about the Torah, not you. You have to recede into the background and allow the Torah insight and light and people seeing what's obvious. He's a humble, modest person offline. He's really genuine and sincere. He's doing this all for the right reasons, spreading Torah everywhere. AlephBeta.org. We don't get a piece of it. It's just, you will not regret it. I don't know anyone who's subscribed or signed up or who watches and listens and learns from Aleph Beta who regrets doing it. Could give it as a gift from someone else.
Yeah, I was wondering if I would have had a Rebbe like him growing up, would that style have appealed to me? Because I know it does right now. There's something that just strikes a chord where it just seems so real.
Yeah.
So it's like mind blowing. Like maybe I would have been more excited about learning had I seen Torah like that.
Right. Yeah, he's the greatest. He's the greatest. It was an honor and a privilege to have him on, to continue to learn from him and talk to him. Rabbi Broide, it's great to be back together and keep traveling to spread Torah everywhere you go. We're super excited. Gonna have another phenomenal episode.
Near you.
Coming to a city near you.
I was actually at the yeshiva here, and there were a bunch of teenagers walking by. So one says, like, the two of them were like kind of following me as I was walking to the yeshiva. So I'm like, oh, maybe these guys know me from this behind of me.
Did they ask if you put tefillin on you?
So they said to me, I said, you mind, what's your name? So I said, it's Josh Broide. Oh, we know you're friends with my father.
Yeah. Rabbi Broide, always a pleasure. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and stay